Hello there, you perfectly lovely people. My name is Sarah, and this evening I am reading from 101 Dalmations by Dodie Smith, and this is the penultimate chapter, which means the chapter before the final chapter. And this one is called, Who Are These Strange Black Dogs? The Dearleys, the nannies, and Perdita had spent a sad Christmas Eve. They'd all been very kind to each other. Perdita had washed the humans so much that they all had chapped hands, and they had to use gallons of hand lotion. Fortunately, Perdita quite liked the taste of this. She had received no news by way of the twilight barking. Reception was bad in that part of Regent's Park, which was why Pongo had done his barking and his listening at Primrose Hill. In the afternoon, the nannies trimmed the Christmas tree. They said it was for Perdita, but they really hoped just to cheer the Dearleys up. The Dearleys put Perdita's presents on it, and they didn't have the heart to get out the presents which they'd bought for Pongo, Mrs. and 15 puppies, just in case they had all come home. Mr. Dearley had guessed that Pongo and Mrs. were searching for the family, but he now feared that family might be scattered all over England, and the best he could really hope for was that Pongo and Mrs. might return. When snow first began to fall, everyone felt worse than ever, and Mrs. didn't even take her coat, said Mrs. Dearley. She pictured Mrs. and Pongo lost, shivering and starving, and so did Mr. Dearley. But they kept that horrid thought to themselves. In the evening, the Dearleys invited the nannies to come up to the drawing room, and they all played nursery card games. Snap, Beggar My Neighbour, and Animal Grab. They all pretended to enjoy themselves, which was very hard work. At last, Mr. Dearley said he would put some Christmas carols on the gramophone. Now, carols are always beautiful, but if you're sad, they can make you feel sadder. There are some people who always find that beauty makes them sadder, which is a very mysterious thing. Soon, the Dearleys and the nannies could hardly keep the tears out of their eyes. When Mr. Dearley realised this, he thought, this must be the last carol we play, and it was Silent Night. Mrs. Dearley put out the lights, drew back the curtains at the tall window so that they could see the stars while they listened, and she saw that it was snowing again. She went back to the sofa and she stroked Perdita, who for once did no washing but just gazed at the falling snowflakes. The voices singing Silent Night were high and clear and peaceful and not very loud. Suddenly, everyone in the room heard a dog bark. "That's Pongo!" cried Mr. Dearley and dashed to the window. "That's Mrs.!" cried Mrs. Dearley, hearing a different bark as she too dashed to the window. They flung the window wide open and stared down through the swirling snow. And then their hearts seemed to turn to lead by disappointment. Down below were two black dogs. Mrs. Dearley said gently, "You shouldn't be out in a night like this. Go home to your owners, my dears." She used the word owners when she should have said pets. That mistake humans make so often. The dogs barked again, but Mr. Dearley said home very firmly, for he felt sure the dogs lived somewhere near, and they must have been let out for a last run before going to bed. He shut the windows, saying to Mrs. Dearley, "Odd-looking dogs, I can't quite recognise the breed." He didn't hear the despairing howl that came from Mrs. It had happened just as she had feared. They were turned away, outcasts in the night. Pongo had a moment of panic. This was something he had not foreseen, but quickly he pulled himself together. "We must bark again," he said, "and much louder." "Shall the puppies bark too?" suggested Mrs. The puppies were all lined up out of sight from the window, because Pongo felt that so many dogs at once might come as a bit of a shock. He now said, "No, only you and I must bark, Mrs. And one at a time they will recognise our voices sooner or later. We would recognise theirs, whatever clothes they wore, whatever colour their faces and hands were." So he barked again, and then Mrs. barked. They went on, taking it in turns. Up in the drawing room, Mrs. Dearley said, "I can't believe that's not Pongo and Mrs. And look how excited Perdita is." "It's because we are longing to hear them," said Mr. Dearley. "We imagine that we do, But there must be something wrong with those black dogs. Just listen to them. Perhaps they're lost. Again, he opened the window. Pongo and Mrs. barked louder than ever and wagged their tails wildly. Anyone would think they knew us, said Mrs. Dearly. Shall we go down and see if they've got collars on? Perhaps we can take them to their homes. Pongo heard this and said to the missus quickly, the moment the door opens, you dash in and lead the way up to the drawing room. Pups, you follow missus, noses to tail. I will bring up the rear and never let there be one moment when Mr. Dearly can close that front door. Once we're in, we can make them understand. The front door opened and out came Mr. Dearly. In shot missus, closely followed by the cad pig, now out of her cart, and all her brothers and sisters except Lucky, who insisted on waiting with Pongo. What with the darkness and the swirling snow, Mr. Dearly did not see what was happening until a pup bumped into him in passing. Roly-poly, of course. Then he looked down to see what had bumped him and saw a steady stream of black pups going through the front door and the white hall and up the white stairs. I'm dreaming this, thought Mr. Dearly, and pinched himself hard, but the stream of pups went on and on. Suddenly, there was a hitch. The two pups, faithfully dragging the cad pig's little blue cart, now empty, could not get up the stairs. Mr. Dearly, who could never see a dog in difficulty without helping, at once picked the cart up himself. After seeing the cart, he no longer felt he was dreaming. These dogs are troops from a circus, he thought. But why have they come to us? A moment later, Pongo and Lucky went past the stream of dogs. And Mr. Dearly called into the night, "Any more out there?" To his relief, no dog answered. So he went in and closed the door. Pongo's sooty hindquarters were just rounding the bend of the stairs. Mr. Dearly followed, 4 steps at a time, still carrying the little blue cart. The scene in the front drawing room was rather confused. Large as the room was, there was no floor space for all the puppies, so they were jumping onto tables and chairs and piling up on top of each other. There was rather a lot of noise. Mrs. Dearly was just managing to keep on her feet. She'd never been frightened of any dogs in her life, but she did feel a trifle startled. The nannies were taking refuge on top of the grand piano. Mr. Dearly took one look through the door, then dashed into the back drawing room and flung open the double doors. A sea of pups surged in, and now there was a little spare floor space left. Pongo barked a command. "All pups who can find space, roll! Roll, missus!" And he himself rolled with a will. The Dearlys stared in utter bewilderment, and then both of them shouted, "Look!" The white carpet was becoming blacker. The black dogs were becoming whiter. "It's Pongo!" cried Mr. Dearly. "Oh, it's missus!" cried Mrs. Dearly. "It's Pongo, missus, and all the puppies!" cried the nannies from the top of the piano. "It's considerably more than all their puppies," said Mr. Dearly, just before Pongo forcibly embraced him. Mrs. was embracing Mrs. Dearly, and the corner of the room was a great deal more embracing. Perdita was going absolutely wild, trying to embrace 8 puppies at once. They were her own long-lost family. It had never struck Pongo that they might be amongst the rescued pups. He'd not even noticed their brown spots before, because he'd hardly seen any of the pups by daylight before they all rolled in the soot. It turned out that Perdita's family was the one that fitted the cad pig's little blue cart so well and had been pulling it so faithfully. The Dearlys had put the cart down in the back drawing room, and the nannies had now gone off the piano and gone to look at it. "That's a child's toy," said Nanny Cook. "And it's got the name of an address on it," said Nanny Butler. She read out, "Master Tommy Tompkins, Farmer, Dimpling, Suffolk." "Dimpling," said Mrs. Dearly. "That's where Cruella de Vil has a house. She told us about it when we had dinner with her and asked if we would like to buy it." And then Mr. Dearly saw it all. He remembered Cruella's desire for a Dalmatian fur coat, guessed that she'd collected all those pups so that Mr. Deville could make many such coats. "You must have the low on her!" cried both nannies together. Oh, goodness. Mr. Dearly said he would think about that after Christmas, but now he must think about feeding the pups. When all the shops were closed, he hurriedly telephoned the Ritz, the Savoy, Claridge's and other rather good hotels and asked them to send page boys along with steaks. Goodness. The hotels were most anxious to help when they heard about the missing Dalmatians and that they had come home. "And at least 6 dozen more than I have ever hoped for," said Mr. Dearly, but he'd still not had time to count the pups. Nanny Butler said, "They must be bathed before they eat." "Bathed?" gasped Mrs. Dearly. "All of them?" "They can't sleep in their suit," said Nanny Cook firmly. "Nanny Butler and I will work in our bathroom, and you two can work in yours. And how about asking that splendid vet and his wife to pop around and bathe pups in the laundry?" So Mr. Dearly rang up the splendid vet, who was delighted to be woken up, and called out at nearly midnight on Christmas Eve. He and his wife arrived in a few minutes. Mrs. Dearly got out all the best bath salts and bath oils and all the lovely coloured bath towels given to her as wedding presents. The nannies lit fires in every room. There were 3 bathing teams going to work. Soon the house was filled with steam, the scent of lilac, roses and jasmine, mixed with the delightful smell of wet dogs. It took less time than you would believe, because 5 pups were put in a bath at a time. They were all wrapped in pink, blue, yellow and green towels and carried to blazing fires to dry. Mr. Dearly thoughtfully turned the drawing room carpet over so that the soot on it would not come off on the clean pups. By the time the last pup was washed, the steaks were arriving. There was enough for everyone, even the humans, who were by this time pretty hungry, and they had theirs cooked. At last, the splendid vet and his wife went home, and the house settled for the night. I'm going to stop right there, because tomorrow it will be the final episode of 101 Dalmatians, called the 101th Dalmatian. Now, I want you to do a complete and utter perdita, and wash your hands, clean your teeth, go to your bed, snuggle with a great big cuddle, and I will see you tomorrow. Night, night, sleep tight.